All right, I think we should get started. Um, Welcome, everyone. My name is Kelvin. I'm from the marketing team here at Rival Technologies and Reach3 Insights. Welcome to Outliers. This is, of course, our weekly event series where we chat with thought leaders and research innovators to find out new strategies and techniques that you can use to engage deeper with your customers, gain deeper insights, and drive better business outcomes. So today we're talking about a topic that is in many ways it's actually like an evergreen topic, right? We're talking about brand loyalty, but we're talking about it in the context of COVID-19. So to start, we'll share some findings from a recent research study, pardon me, that we've done on this. And then we'll also talk about these concepts of mental availability and physical availability to drive sales. And then, of course, we'll look into the future and talk about next steps. So what are the business questions that we need to answer in order to drive loyalty moving forward? Before we start, I'd like to encourage you to engage with us the next half hour or so. And so please feel free to use the chat feature here on Zoom to share your feedback, your thoughts, your questions. And a bit later, we'd love it if some of you could go online and actually ask the questions directly to our speakers. So speaking of speakers, I brought two of the smartest people that I've ever worked with for this topic. We have Matt Kleinschmit, who is CEO and founder of Reach3 Insights, and we have Ben Hudson, who is head of marketing at Rival Group Inc. So to start, well, let's give everyone a quick intro on the two of you. Please tell us a little bit about what you do at Reach3 and Rival, and a little bit about your background and insights in marketing. Matt, let's start with you.
Sure, that sounds good. Thanks, Kelvin. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Matt Kleinschmit, founder and CEO of Reach3 Insights. Relatively new organization. We've been around for about 3 years. So if you haven't heard of us, you're not alone. I have been in the business for a little while, though, probably longer than I'd like to admit, but going on almost 25 years now, and in a variety of roles, and sort of this intersection of insights and technology throughout my career. It's been really fascinating to see sort of the role of technology in the insights discipline and some of the advancements that it's brought, and most notably speed and power. Within our current business, we're continuing to leverage technology to bring, new ways of doing things, new ways of gathering insights, new ways of analyzing data, and also new ways of unlocking those insights for our clients and disseminating that information throughout the enterprise. So that's just a quick little background. By the way, I'm based in Chicago. And the Reach3 enterprise, we have teams in Chicago and Toronto and Vancouver and San Francisco and LA and Australia and a few other folks scattered throughout North America as well. So we've had a really nice growth trajectory over the last few years, and I'm really excited to see some of our clients joining us here today, and super excited to get on with the discussion. So I'll hand it over to Ben for a quick intro.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for coming. My name's Ben Hudson, and after that intro from Kelvin, I'm going to go and change my bio on the Rival Group website because that's a pretty nice introduction. I've been in and out of the insight space for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I worked in the advertising space and saw a huge opportunity to sort of see they bring those worlds together, those worlds of market research and those worlds of marketing, and start to be on the forefront of that convergence. And that's really what led me to the Rival Group, and working with Matt and his crew at Reach3 has been one of the highlights of the last couple of years for me. And we're doing some really cool stuff across the enterprise. And one of the big constant topics that comes up is this notion of employee advocacy, of customer advocacy, customer retention, customer loyalty, and what does that mean? And what does that mean in the face of major global events, most recently COVID? And so I'm excited to dig in here and mostly be Matt's straight man, because he is the expert on this, and I'm here to smile and nod.
Thanks for that intro, guys. Now, this summer, as businesses in states and provinces were opening up in North America, Reach3 conducted a study to understand what's changing in the consumer landscape. Matt, give us some background on why and how the study was conducted.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, obviously, it's no surprise over the past, year and a half, there's been sort of one thing on everyone's minds, and that is, COVID-19. If we were to take a step back and rewind to March of 2020, actually, if you go back a little bit further, I do recall, in January of 2020, as we turned into, the new decade and, just the term 2020, I remember distinctively, talking to a lot of my colleagues at that time and kind of joking around and saying, 2020, it's going to be the year when everything comes into focus. Ha ha ha, it's my dad joke. And everyone kind of laughed. But I really did believe that everything was going to come into focus in 2020, particularly for our business as our business was evolving. And then sure enough, 2 months later, the entire world changed, as we all know. And, one of the first things we did as an organization when that happened is, we did what we do best, which is we decided to try to learn more, get closer to consumers and understand what was happening. And so we fired up a really fast what we call a mobile community, leveraging rival technology, mobile messaging based way of capturing insights on the go in the moment. This sort of blend of quantitative and qualitative techniques. Video is a key component of that as well. And so within a matter of hours, we fired up a community of thousands of North Americans. And we went along with those Americans for the next 18 months on a journey through COVID, as they, went about their lives, as they adapted to the situation that they were in themselves personally. We looked at it in aggregate so we could get good, robust, quantitative, representative type of findings. But we also went deep into specific cohorts, into specific individuals, and how they were dealing with all the changes. And it was a really interesting endeavor, and we're still obviously learning from it, and we're digesting a lot of the data that we've had over the last 18 months and continuing to collect more. And so that was the sort of the background and the impetus for this. And we've learned so much, and we've shared a lot of this with our clients. It obviously has influenced a lot of the methodologies that we're using and recommending with clients as well. And also, of course, impacting our findings and implications that we bring to clients at the tail end of our studies. And so that was kind of the background. Just from a methodological perspective, it was, thousands of Americans and Canadians. We were engaging with them usually once or twice a week. And for many of those folks, they stuck with us through the entire time, which is quite amazing. When we weren't really using financial incentives for that. So it was speaks to kind of the power of the topic and the technology and making the research experience be as engaging and conversational as possible. So that was a bit of background on the study, Kelvin.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and we do have a report and a deliverable that we can share with attendees here later, so they can read the full report. But in the next few minutes, can you give us some of your top takeaways from the latest report?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, I think just to quickly circle back, I think, I did mention that, there are quite a few reports available. Kelvin mentioned this on our website. We have a whole series of COVID related reports, and actually post-COVID, into kind of this era that we're in right now, which is, sort of this, sense of purgatory, as it were, here in the States. So a lot to digest there, and a lot of really good sort of reporting and deliverables there. I'd encourage everyone to go check out if you'd like, or send us a direct email. We're happy to send as well. But in terms of like the findings themselves, I think one of the things that struck me when I was reflecting back on this just the other day, actually, we continue to have a lot of our clients across a wide range of industries, from CPG to retail to technology and media and entertainment and gaming, consumer healthcare, financial services. Many of these clients are they're talking now about what comes next. But in getting to what comes next, a lot of times it helps to sort of take a look back. So I was reflecting a lot about, sort of the evolution of, consumer sentiment and behaviors over the course of COVID, and how the impact of that, and how we are, right now. And it's interesting, in the initial days, not surprisingly, of the lockdown, and when COVID really was starting to sink in March, April, May of 2020, I would say the initial feelings and what we found from a lot of folks is this just idea of, fear, quite honestly, fear and trepidation about the future, and both economic uncertainty, but also just personal safety as well, and how big of themes those were. And I think, now we're kind of, all of us are past this to a certain degree, but, to think back to that time, there was a lot of fear. And, I think in particular about, we were obviously engaging with a lot of consumers during that time. And one particular video that we collected, we were, obviously, as I mentioned, we're capturing quantitative projectional data, but also have the ability to really dive deep with, very immersive video. And we had, an individual in one of our touch points who, was giving us a video selfie about, we asked a question about, what would you tell yourself if you could go back in time, 3 weeks before everything hit? What would you tell yourself then? And, it was really quite touching. And to be honest, it was, a very emotional sort of video. This individual was, really fighting back tears and telling themselves that, to be strong, to, be strong and be there for their children. And it was just an incredibly powerful video that I think really, for me, encapsulates that first 3 months of the pandemic. And it also, for me, underscores sort of the important role that the insights professional is playing in, today's modern enterprise, and how the power of a lot of modern technologies are able to unlock, that really critical human emotion and feeling that so many of us as business professionals are craving to understand. And so that's for me characterizes the first part of the pandemic and some of our findings. Now, when we move forward and we get to sort of, last fall and heading into the winter, we had a lot of people that, the sentiment and a lot of the feelings that was, just about sort of, boredom and ongoing survival and just sort of people being locked in their current routines. What we did notice is that people's daily routines shifted significantly. And that includes, sort of work from home, school life, et cetera. But also a lot of interesting things about their consumption behaviors, which was quite interesting. And a lot of the time at that point, things were starting to stick. People were sort of like getting into their routines. The other thing that really started to pop heading into winter and heading into the beginning of this year, quite honestly, was this idea about health and wellness, and this notion of people being attuned to their own well-being, whether it be physical as well as mental. That started to really, come of age and start to pop early this year. And then I would say, another sort of meaningful touch point for me was when we started to get into May of this year. And, as everyone, who's an American who was on this call, could remember, in May of this year, there was, just this real sort of, excitement and optimism about, the summer and opening up and, vaccinations rolling out and things getting back to quote unquote normal. And so there's this real pent up sort of demand, which I thought was really interesting. And at that wave, when we did that touch point with our ongoing research community, what we started to see is that, there was just this real excitement to get back together. This, I want to get together with friends and family members and go out socially and see music and do those sorts of things. People really excited about indoor dining, really excited about going to see concerts, as I mentioned, but with other people. Specifically, the idea of in-person social interaction was a real key theme. From a commerce perspective and from a business perspective, a couple things that I thought, were really struck me when I looked at this most recent set of data. And, obviously there were some things that are holdovers from, people's routines. So, people who are saying they're going to continue to cook at home a lot and home cooked meals. Online shopping obviously exploded. And we found that, almost 60% of the folks that we were talking to said they were not only going to continue to do what they're doing now when they were sort of semi-locked down, but also do it more. Which I thought was really interesting. And then, of course, we had obviously a lot of people saying they were going to continue to do things like, remote work, Zoom meetings. From an entertainment perspective, a lot of people saying they were going to continue to do a lot of streaming behaviors, and those were going to stick: streaming music, streaming video, gaming as well. So those were activities that we saw were really going to sort of, persist in the way that they were happening during the COVID lockdown. But there's two data points in particular that really, frankly, jumped out at me. And we asked folks, during the COVID experience for them, had they, tried a new brand or product during that time. And what we found is that, 45% of the US population ages 18 and older, so almost half of the population ages 18 and older, had tried a new brand or product during the COVID lockdown. And even more interesting is that 85% of those folks are continuing to use that same brand and product that they moved to during the pandemic. And those stats in particular for me were kind of a wake-up call in many respects. Not that, we don't all know there's a certain degree of brand switching that's happening and that sort of thing at an ongoing basis. But what that really showed me is that COVID really did reshuffle the deck. And it shook up everyone's, routines and rituals, their daily behaviors in such a radical way that it sort of forced the introduction of new brands and products into their lives to meet those needs that they were now seeing as a part of these new routines. And what happened over the course of that time period is people ended up sticking with a lot of those same brands and products. Certainly early on, the impetus for this was, the idea of, it was an out of stock, or I couldn't get this brand, so I switched, and those sorts of things. But it struck me the persistence of usage of those same brands and products since that time period, something I thought was, really a compelling statistic. And I think, for all of us, it really sort of brought to life, and it emphasizes this notion that during the COVID era, there's sort of these winners and losers from a brand perspective. And in many cases, the winners were ones that, maybe didn't even expect to be winners. And the circumstances were such that, they became winners just by the products they had at the right time. And for others, the pandemic was really, in many cases, a fatal blow that put many businesses, frankly, in bankruptcy, and certainly shuttered, a number of brands as well. And so these sort of seemingly random, yet, when you think about it, very, rational kind of outcomes that resulted from the whole COVID era was something that I thought was really interesting. And the degree of brand switching that was happening during that time frame is something I thought was, pretty powerful.
Yeah, so lots of good insights and stats there. Ben, as a marketing leader, what stood out for you from these findings?
I think that the biggest thing that stood out for me as a marketer, you want to believe that the work we're doing is creating some sense of brand loyalty, that people are going out into the shops and they're searching for the thing that we've created, this identity that we've created, those emotional hooks that you create when we're doing our job well. We want to believe that makes a really, really, really big difference, right? That people go in there and they're looking for our specific brand. And to a certain extent, they are. But the number that jumped out at me was that 37% of consumers were really motivated to buy something new simply as a desire to really just shake things up. Like they were just like, hey, I'm just going to try something new. Why not? And what we saw in the news was sort of a story that didn't quite match that. It was this idea that brand loyalty was out the window. People would go into the stores, and when they always went and picked Palmolive dish soap, they picked Palmolive dish soap because it was their dish soap. And as soon as the Palmolive dish soap wasn't available, they just took whatever one they could find, and they realized, oh, hey, maybe dish soap, maybe I'm not a Palmolive dish soap advocate. And that notion that brand loyalty was starting to erode, and it was driven by something like COVID, was something that at first kind of stuck with me. And then when you kind of like step back and go, okay, wait a minute, what are those triggers? What are those drivers of brand loyalty? What does that actually mean to a consumer? What does it mean when you're talking about the mental availability and the actual physical availability of those products? How much impact does that have? And what is the work that we're doing as marketers? What does that mean for brand loyalty, and how do we drive that brand loyalty? So the sort of the theme that bubbled up for me was this notion, or this sort of like sense of the real fragility of brand loyalty, that the brands that we work so hard to build really are not as robust as we think that they are, and how quickly people can abandon something that you thought was sort of a part of, was woven into the fabric of their life. And on the flip side, You see these companies like Brunswick that we're presenting with at Quirks in the upcoming days, where all of a sudden people are making these really, really big, like what would be considered a life-changing purchase, massive, complicated purchase cycle. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to buy a boat. Right. So all of a sudden you've got this thing that people would never really have considered to buy. And now they're just going to completely make this massive lifestyle change and buy this hugely expensive thing. And it's not about like brand loyalty. It was like this, like, I just want to do this because I have the opportunity to do it. And it's just really like, hey, there's an opportunity. It's there. I have some money. I'm doing it. And that trickled down, or didn't even trickle down. It was a broad swath from buying a new boat, $100,000 boat, all the way down to buying like a $2 bottle of dish soap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Matt, Ben already mentioned physical and mental availability. I know these concepts are very popular in CPG, but for those of us outside of consumer goods, maybe give us a bit of an overview on these two concepts and tell us how they relate to what we're now seeing in the consumer landscape.
Sure thing. Yeah. So the idea of mental availability and physical availability is really driven, and noted and sort of popularized by Byron Sharp. And for those of you who don't know, Byron Sharp is a professor at the University of South Australia. So the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, which is, they study marketing principles. And he released a book in 2011 called How Brands Grow. And it's really become sort of a seminal reference point for a lot of modern marketers, in particular in the CPG world, so fast-moving consumer goods, but more broadly than that as well. And it's based on a lot of empirical data sets, purchase data that was provided to them by a variety of different CPG manufacturers. And then coupled with, advertising spending and those sorts of things. So a lot of really interesting inputs that the team there was able to really dive into. And they, released this book with some really, in some cases, sort of counterintuitive types of results to what the modern marketer, historically has thought. And
certainly wants to believe anyway.
that wants to believe. Exactly. Yeah. And I think, it's really interesting because at the end of the day, the two concepts that you boil down to is that, if your brand is going to grow and if people are going to buy your product, they have to have, mental availability for your brand and that product. And they have to have, there has to be physical availability. So the means for them to go and buy it. On the mental availability side, it really is about being, it's top of mind, having some kind of a connection to that brand. And it's driving a lot of things that you're seeing in modern marketing today, including the concept of cultural relevance and distinctiveness of brands, how brands can connect with particular, consumer segments and cohorts, and doing so oftentimes through, things such as, icons or taglines or, personalities or celebrity endorsers and those sorts of things. This idea of cultural relevance that ties into some sort of an emotional connection that will keep your brand top of mind when the consumer is at that point where they are making a decision. It's also the other aspect or sort of dimension I would bring into this is the idea of jobs theory and jobs to be done. And so when a consumer is at that point and they have, let's say they have a need for, something that is refreshing, there's any number of things that could fulfill that need or do that job for the consumer. For example, it could be stopping at a C-store to pick up a carbonated beverage. It could be pulling over to a drive-through and ordering a drink there. It could be grabbing a bottle of water out of their work bag that's with them in the car. They're the consumer, and this theory, the consumer is essentially hiring a brand to do that job at that point in time. And whatever brands come to mind or are present, mentally present and mentally available at that point are going to have a leg up on those that aren't, obviously. And then the next piece of the puzzle is obviously the consumer being able to actually buy that brand at that point in time, which is obviously driven, that's driven a lot of distribution strategies of product manufacturers over the last 5 to 10 years, getting out of some of the traditional channels or expanding beyond the traditional channels into sort of new channels of distribution, non-traditional types of retailers and other types of buying venues. So those concepts are definitely at play here. And when you think about the idea of COVID sort of, sweeping across the land, it created an entirely new set of sort of jobs that people had needed to be done. And the brands that jumped into place and meant something to consumers at that point in time, and consumers were actually able to buy those products, really won out. And so it speaks to two things. One, from a branding perspective of it being a continual, ongoing activity that's very dynamic. Cultural relevance is a very sort of, fluid type of thing. What's culturally relevant today may not be culturally relevant, 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now. And so it really does require sort of a very diligent, ongoing connection to the pulse of what's happening in pop culture. And then from a physical availability perspective, obviously within COVID, there were a whole host of challenges related to distribution, out of stocks, supply chain issues, et cetera. And so this opened up a whole new root of challenges. And I think, if I take a step back and look backward on what we went through and where we are today, keeping in mind those stats about, almost half of the population has switched brands or products, and 85% of folks of those same folks are staying with those same branded product. It really, COVID to me, as I mentioned, was this big reshuffling of the deck where those brands that had the right connection, emotional connection to consumers, and the availability aspect really were able to jump in and see share. Conversely, those brands that, maybe were a little bit out of touch with their end consumer and maybe had poor distribution or, supply chain issues, et cetera, a lot of those folks really had a very hard time. And when we fast forward to where we are today, we now have brands that have this whole crop of quote unquote new customers that have joined that brand's franchise. And it really is, important and imperative for brands to really understand those new customers and what are the differences between them and some of the older customers they had. Do they have, new desires and needs and expectations, and how can brands meet those? And I'll tell you what, if they're not able to meet those, we know certainly from the data set and what we've seen over the last 18 months that consumers are going to be very willing to look for something else. So this isn't a one and done kind of scenario. It's a continual, ongoing effort to ensure that your brand is popping for consumers in those moments where they're looking to purchase, and yet you have a wide enough distribution network to be able to deliver those products to those consumers at that time.
Great. So that's great. Now I want to be respectful of people's time, so I want to ask a few questions that were submitted here. Mary Ann asks, does this erosion of brand loyalty vary across industries? Like, what have we seen in terms of like CPG versus technology versus services?
Yeah, great question. I think, we did do a bit of a deep dive into some industry related data. We didn't go super deep into that. What I will say is that, there's this idea of sort of, entrenchment, and, for certainly like fast moving consumer goods, oftentimes there's not a lot of entrenchment of that brand or that product into people's lifestyles and routines. And so when their routines fluctuate or change, there's a really easy opportunity for consumers to make a switch. So fast moving consumer goods, certainly something that we saw a lot of change in. We also saw quite a bit of change just based on routines in things like apparel. Obviously, industries like athleisure, which already were experiencing growth, really took off. And, a lot of folks refer to, COVID as being kind of the great accelerator of a lot of trends. And I would definitely concur with that. And I think that, we see that, all over the place. On the technology side of the equation, oftentimes, tech is a little bit more embedded in people's lives. There's sort of a higher bar, in an inertia to change. And that certainly, prevents people oftentimes from making that change right away. And that certainly was the case also in financial services. So those, categories that have a degree of kind of less entanglement, were certainly more apt to for brand switching. But we did see brand switching and product switching, across the board.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Matt, you get the other part to that too, and you touched on it, is there's the switching element of it as well. But what we also saw was there was brand switching and then plus. And you saw all these categories that just sold out. Electronics sold out. bikes sold out, fitness equipment sold out, Harley Davidson sold out. Like people are just making this decision to go and try new things. So they're sort of, as you touched on, their day-to-day routine, maybe what they ate for breakfast shifted a little bit. Maybe the dish soap they use shifted a little bit. Maybe they were not, there was some stuff in the news recently about celebrities not showering as much. I don't know if that's from COVID, but maybe people aren't showering every single day and every single afternoon because you're home all the time. And so there's some shifting there, but we also saw this massive uptake in, what I would say sort of luxury, like high discretionary luxury purchase. And people bought those things, and then the opportunity, what we're seeing, and the work that Ron is actually on this call as well, the conversation that he's going to be having in Quirks in a couple of days is, now that you've got these people, now that you've brought them in, how do you keep them loyal? How do you maintain their loyalty? And I think on the theme of smartest people saying smart things, one of the most interesting things I've heard recently was Larissa from Brunswick was saying, they're not just new customers who have come along the same familiar paths of purchase that we're used to. They're not customers from that same cohort that have done a whole bunch of research and have now arrived at the decision to buy this thing, to buy this boat. They are a totally new set of new customers that needed to be treated as a new segment. And you have to understand the path to purchase that they follow. You have to understand those nuances and those hooks, and you have to understand, how fragile that new relationship is, because what works for them today and right now may not hold down the line. So how do you bring them in? How do you understand what their needs and expectations are today? And how do those differ from those customers that you have already in your database, really is what it boils down to.
Great. Indu has a question. Are you online, Indu?
Yes, I'm online. Thank you for the presentation. It was lovely. I have two questions actually. So for Matt, I had this question that, is there any particular market segment where the consumer shift has been noticed? So you already stated that it is majorly in FMCG market, but any specific in that? And second question is for Ben, the one that you stated or noticed that major consumption is happening or changing in luxury segment. So do you think that it is because of the disposable income that people have? Like there is this increase in disposable income. Is that because of, is this increase in luxury item because of that?
I don't know. I don't have enough data to tell you specifically around that. I do know with some of the customers that we've been working with, what they found was that there was this desire to pursue activities with their family and their friends in places that they perceived as safe. So, you gravitate towards bikes and boats and motorcycles and snowmobiles and those kinds of things. Was it because there was a whole bunch of more money that was injected into the system? I don't know the answer to that. My sense is no. Like, I don't think there was that much money that came back in. If you don't take a family trip, there's a little bit extra money. I think there was this idea of, hey, I need to do something. I want to do something. This is a catalyst for me to make a change and do something different and cool and neat with my family or my loved ones, or how do I create some level of excitement and interest and not feel so trapped here? And so the sense of permission to go and make those big purchases, I think, was reduced. But I think that's a really interesting question that deserves a deeper dive, and there's an opportunity to understand that further. Do I think it's because there was a whole bunch of cash dumped in there? I think it made it a bit easier. Do I think that was the driver? I don't think it was the driver, no.
So basically what I meant is that, okay, one is that whole lot of cash coming in, but second was my major point was that people like you and I who are working from home now have more disposable income. Our day-to-day expenses have reduced. So I meant it in that manner. So people like us are going for family trips and want to spend some quality time and make sure that acts as a catalyst. So do you think that increase in disposable income for working professionals is one of the factors?
I think that it probably loosened the jar, as one of my old bosses used to say. It made the decision a little bit easier. You have a couple extra $1,000 in the bank, and it makes it easier to do that. I think the drive to do something new, to create normalcy, to create a sense of connection and spend time with your families was the bigger driver. I think having a little bit of money in the bank made it feel a little bit easier, but I don't know, Matt, what do you think? I don't know that we asked that question specifically.
I think you're bang on. There's a lot of different types of drivers to that sort of thing. I mean, the cohort or the segment into is really an important thing, a lens to which to look at this. And I think, when we look at the data, on some of these brand switching behaviors, certainly if you look at, lower income cohorts, a lot of the switching that was done was switching down. So it was trading down, which is a classic sort of recessionary kind of thing. And we're trading down, this product we typically buy to something else. Now, that said, some of those trade down decisions and some of those types of decisions there were really, the catalyst for those was really, the fact that there was such limited availability for things, right? So people were in many cases forced to switch. The things that Ben is talking about, though, some of these high discretionary types of purchases, is an interesting thing, because in many cases, those were, some of these products, because we're not just talking about big purchases like boats and the like. I think of, last summer, the summer of 2020, when all of a sudden everyone realized that, hey, we're going to be outside in the fall and the winter. And there was this huge rush on heat lamps, or outdoor fire pits, or lawn furniture and all that stuff. And so those are things that, really it was, the context of the situation that people were in. And one of the things that as an insights professional, when we're sort of designing a piece of research to answer a question, there's sort of three aspects that we're trying to answer for. And what I believe is, the reason why we founded our company a few years ago, and the type of mobile messaging based, techniques that we use that are kind of blending quant and qual and video and the like. I mean, the idea here is that, can we in one research touch point understand the behavior, the emotions, and the context? And if you're able to capture those three things, even in a certain degree, you're able to get a little bit closer to understanding the full 360 understanding of why they made that decision, whether it's changing or continuing on or altering something, some behavior or perception or sentiment, attitude, et cetera. And I think, for many people who are going through lockdown, regardless of their own personal financial situation, the broader macro impact of that lockdown and the isolation and the sense of, the feeling that, their safety was potentially threatened and they were disconnected from loved ones and friends, maybe not able to participate in, some of the things that they enjoy doing that makes them, happy and satisfied in their own lives. I think that moved people to do things and make decisions in ways that maybe they ordinarily wouldn't have. Certain people going out and buying, 3 or 4 heat lamps for their house. But it's just one of those things where I feel like there's a lot of variability there. It's hard to make some generalizations. I think, to your point, we did see a lot of trading down on those types of products. We also saw, we know from a lot of the data from the government data and economic data that wealthy people or people who are working, et cetera, did accumulate wealth during the pandemic because they weren't spending it on a lot of discretionary expenses. We do know that. That certainly is one aspect of what's driving it. But to Ben's point, I think, probably a little deeper, a little bit more of an emotional sort of driver were some of the things that I mentioned around, this innate desire to be close to family and friends and have some sort of outlet in a time where there was so much uncertainty.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, all right, great. So I think we have time for just one more question, and this one is coming from Clint. Hey, Clint.
Hey guys, how you doing? So I had a quick question regarding the fragility of the consumers that Ben was actually talking about, because one of the things that I was hearing, and I'd love to know your take on it, was that there needs to be an increased focus on the consumer experience across products. It doesn't necessarily mean what industry. And do you feel like following COVID, that really has picked up, that to maintain that long-term brand loyalty, to really focus on that fragility that this segment has, and maintain these consumers in your market, you really have to focus on the consumer experience now, as opposed to maybe the monetization or other things in your business plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So whenever I talk about consumer experience, I sort of see it through two lenses. There's the capital C, capital X, like big, like meaty consumer experience platforms and programs that people put in and invest a ton of money into it, that, you know, with the routing and CSAT and NPS, there's that side of it. And then there's the lower C, lower E sort of like consumer experience. What happens when I go online and I search for something and I discover something I see something cool on YouTube. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then you go down this sort of rabbit hole and you're like, oh, here we go. That's a neat thing. I kind of want that. That path to purchase, that the route that people took to discover your brand and make that purchase, I think fundamentally changed. So understanding how those people found you in the first place, understanding what Matt said, what were the emotional drivers, what was the context. I think understanding that is hugely important. And then understanding how the expectations of of your traditional customer base are different or have shifted from the expectations of your new cohort of customers. If I have, let's use I think you also have to look a little bit at what you're talking about when you talk about, like, there was also home furnishings. Everything sold out in home furnishings, right? Like what drove that? Like, is it time? Is it money? Is it, oh my God, I can't sit at my kitchen table and look at that ugly couch anymore. I need to get rid of that thing. Like, I've now realized how awful this couch is. So understanding those nuances and the thinking, and then being able to take that and extrapolate that across a larger segment of your customer. I think that's the name of the game. How do you take those learnings? So yeah, is it driven by CX? I think it is, if you think about it in terms of the digital experience, of that digital path to purchase of what Matt and I talk a lot about the notion of fulfillment, and I ordered it and it came, and did it look like I wanted it? Was I happy with the price? Like that whole that whole infrastructure that's put into place is so different from a year ago, and customers or brands are scrambling to keep up in that side. So understanding, where did they come from, what made them buy those things, what was it like when they actually got it, what's going to happen next, are they ever going to do it again? I think that's a hugely important piece of this, as you sort of scramble to understand, how do you keep these people in your wheelhouse, how do you keep them engaged and interested? And I think it is very, very different than capital C, capital E customer experience, like big weighty programs. I think that's part of it. That's part of your ongoing learning, and you need to know what those numbers are, and those numbers are connected to C-suite and executive compensation, so that's always going to be a part of what you're doing. But going back a layer, going back 2 or 3 layers, and being like, okay, like, tell me the story of how you even got here. Like, what drove this, and what's your plan now? It's fresh in my mind, so I'll use the example that we use with Brunswick. But there's a sort of an ongoing thing in the world of boating, is the best day of your life is when you buy your boat and when you sell your boat. What they need to understand is, as a new consumer, when it's the best day of your life buying your new boat, how do you push out the next best day of your life as long as possible, so that isn't the best day of your life? In fact, you sell the boat and buy another one. And that is experience. That's experience at all those key touch points, and all those micro moments that make that a meaningful sort of brand engagement and brand understanding that for me really drive loyalty. Are you reinforcing it in the sorry, yeah, go ahead, Clint.
No. I was just going to say thank you. I actually really appreciate that, like, overall outlook at the customer journey, as opposed to just like unique experience programs and items like that. So I think you're right, and that is kind of that we're looking at everything now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have the ability to look at everything now, which is really cool. Andrew Reed, who is the founder of Rival Technologies and the group CEO of the Rival Group, he talks about the ability to track And anything that you can't track, you have to ask. And so there's huge imbalance of ability to track. So then in those touch points where you can't track that, or you can't understand it, or you don't have the context you need to then be able to go in and ask. And the work that Matt and those guys are doing on the Reach3 side is really focused in on, like, how are you asking that? What are the tactics that you're using? What are the questions? And when you take that customer output or that customer input into your system, what are you going to do with it, and how are you activating it? That's a big part of it for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
One thing just to add one final thought on that is, I personally feel like, I just wrote a piece recently that I think is published in the Work publication this week, and if anyone's interested in taking a look at it, please reach out. The thing that I think right now is that, Clint, I would kind of double down on what you're saying there and say that, customer experience is more important than ever right now, because if people come out of COVID and they've been through this rapid sort of, this era of promiscuity with brands where, it is trying different brands and products and this sort of thing. We're at a very sort of delicate spot right now where if you have new customers that you've gained during COVID, I'll tell you what, you better be very careful and very attentive to their needs and really get to know who they are and understand in a very deep way their unmet needs and their expectations. Because if you're not doing that, your competitor is. And we know from the past that, what the future is going to look like. And those folks are going to switch as soon as they feel a need to do that. And so, the piece that I wrote in Work is really this idea that now is the time that for every brand to think like a challenger brand. And those brands that are going to rest on their laurels and sit back and sort of think that these new customers are just going to be there for an ongoing time frame are going to be sorely mistaken. They need to think that, that customer is going to exit within 2 weeks, and they have to do everything they can to understand, what that customer is expecting from them so that they can super serve those needs. In addition, they also need to bring those customers together with other customers to create a sense of community and create essentially a tribe of advocates in the marketplace. And then finally, they need to activate that brand in a very meaningful way through, digital storytelling and storytelling more generally, that underscores and emphasizes sort of the cultural connections and the emotional connections that the brand has with those customers to begin with. And in doing so, reinforces sort of the core sense of, values and mission and, reason for being, so to speak, as to why that brand is delivering that product for that consumer at that point in time. And so I actually believe that, like, customer experience right now is more important than it ever has been. Not that it hasn't been, but even more so, it's heightened because people are frankly so used to switching brands and products that if you're not offering it up right now, they're going to go and find another brand that is going to be able to meet their needs. And this is particularly attuned and really big right now in the service industry, because so many of these businesses who were shuttered down, had to furlough a lot of employees. Now they're back open. They're operating in somewhat of a hybrid situation or a modified situation. And now they can't find workers either. And the ones they can find, they have to retrain. They're in a very precarious position. And frankly, there's a lot of opportunity for, more nimble, agile, sort of well-trained, well-experienced competitors to come in and steal share. So I think it's a time for every brand right now to think about, what do I have to do to keep my customers? What do I know what their needs are? Do I know who they really are as a cohort? What are their emotional drivers as to why they're picking our brand? What kind of needs are we fulfilling? If we don't know those things, that's a big problem, and could lead to future customer churn. So that's just my take on that situation.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben.
Well, yeah, love that question, Clint. I think we probably could have like a separate webinar just for that topic. Really meaty. So yeah, we'll stop here, but I just want to share 3 takeaways that I heard today. There's the importance of creating mental availability and physical availability to drive sales. We also learned about understanding your new customers and how they're different from your more typical traditional non-COVID customers. And then of course, what Matt just mentioned in terms of like thinking like a challenger brand and making sure that you're doing everything you can to super serve the needs of your new customers. So if you have any takeaways or anything like that, please feel free to share them with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to tag both Reach3 and Rival. That's it for this week, but hopefully you can join us next week when we talk to Ben again and to Julia Morton about social media recruitment and social sampling. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Kelvin. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.